Well, welcome to our third year Parents Information Opportunity video on predominantly our third year options. And I hope when we say Parents Information, I do hope there are some students watching as well. In fact, they will have had their talk at other opportunities, but it's quite nice if you get the opportunity to sit down and watch this together. In a moment, I'm going to be handed over to Mr. Cooper, the Academic Deputy, and he in turn will be handing over to Mr. Grant, Head of Third Year, to talk you through the options process, some of the whys and wherefores, some of the thoughts to consider. And all of this, of course, in conjunction with the upcoming Parents' Evening and also in conjunction with you being able to ask individual questions we'll come on to later at a time that's convenient to you. So just to touch on that point, this is an as live video rather than live. So you could be watching this on the day it's released, the 21st of January. You could be watching it almost any time afterwards. Following feedback from previous years, people have said, well, actually, rather than having a live video that we have to tune into at that time and then we don't really capture the moment in the same way if we go back to it later, could we have something that's pre-recorded that we can dip into as and when we'd like to? So that's what we've done this year, but we'd also welcome your feedback on whether or not that's worked for you. So we're going to run through some of the options and so it's kind of process, and then we're going to come back at the end to address some of those typical questions, but I'll re-emphasize the opportunity for students to talk to staff, for a presentation to be given in assemblies, but also for you as parents and indeed students, together or independently, to contact us about any questions you have about the options process or the choices you should be making. So welcome to you all again, and I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leheck. And probably the first thing to say is that whenever you're watching this, you should be able to have this booklet. This booklet should have made its way home. If it hasn't for any reason, firstly, please do ask your son and daughter. Failing that, get their bag and tip it upside down and see what falls out. If all of those things fail, then if you go on to the Firefly page where you're currently watching this video, you will be able to find an online version of it. So it's there and available for you. And the kind of information it's got in it is firstly about all the different GCSE courses that are on offer, but it'll also tell you things, for example, whether any of those subjects have what's now called NEA, non-examined assessments, what we used to call coursework. It'll just tell you whether any of those subjects do or don't have coursework and what the weighting is of that particular coursework. So do consult this booklet. It should be very helpful to you. So I'm just going to go over a few sort of parts of the options process. As I say, all that information is in this booklet, but just to sort of highlight the key things behind the options process. So the first thing you'll notice is obviously that division between core and option subjects, and this is something that you'll already be familiar with, and probably the first thing that will strike you actually is the core subjects. So 7 core subjects out of the 10 that students will take actually fills up the majority of what GCSEs are all about. So with the 2 Englishes, English language and literature, maths, 3 sciences, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as at least 1 modern language that all students take. So that's 7 out of their 10 subjects. And the point is that that core is sufficiently broad to keep all their options open for A-level choices, and as well as these are the sort of subjects that universities would expect to see in order to be able to assess students from different schools, different backgrounds against each other. So the core is sufficiently broad, we think, to prepare them for whatever lies ahead. So then all we're really looking at this evening is the option subjects. And to some extent, you've already been through round 1 of this process. So going into the third year, obviously narrowed down a number of those subjects. So most of you will only be looking at perhaps sort of 5 of those subjects at most, from which you then need to choose 3. Now, in terms of different combinations of subjects, that really is down to individual choice. And Mr. Grant's going to say a little bit more about some of the questions that might go through your mind when you're thinking about which subjects you might choose. So really, that's all there is to options. It is just choosing 3 of the subjects out of those that your son or daughter has continued with into the third year. So let's just go over a couple of the details about this. So first of all, as I've noted, even though this is part of the core, you do still need to obviously choose your language. Now, again, this might not be a choice because the majority of students will only be doing 1 language in the third year. A number are doing 2, and a very small number will also be doing Mandarin. And there's some details again in the booklet about what to do about your subject choices if you're currently doing more than one language. So for most people, choosing your core language is pretty easy. You just select the language you're already studying. So the thing that probably causes most questions, and it's not even a real sort of choice element, is about our structure for teaching science at GCSE, which is actually very, very similar to most other schools, certainly all independent schools in our local area. So all students, as it says, will study all 3 of the sciences. So biology, physics and chemistry, they'll study it on exactly the same number of lessons, same timetable. There's a difference though between what we call the double or dual award and the triple award. So the majority of students, so that's probably about 80% in each year group, will study all 3 sciences. They'll take 2 separate papers and at the end of it they'll get 3 separate GCSE grades. But we know already through the 3rd year that some students do find sciences more challenging and may continue to do so throughout their GCSE years. So that's when we start to look at whether it would be more suitable for them to follow what's called double science or the dual award. So they still study all 3 sciences, but as they get to the end of the 2-year course and sit their GCSEs, they will only sit 1 paper for each of those subjects. And what that means is that they will have been taught at a slightly different pace, a more suitable pace. They will have also been taught in smaller groups. And all of that combined with actually a much more favourable grading band for dual award compared to science. So actually a lower threshold to achieve what are still the top grades. So you can still achieve grades 7, 8 and 9 doing the dual award. They stand a better chance of actually securing those higher grades by having worked at that more suitable pace and in a smaller group. And that's why for some students we will recommend that they follow dual award rather than triple award. Now those decisions are usually finalised around the January of their 4th year. So for the autumn term, certainly all students will follow the same syllabus to make sure that those options remain open. Now, I've talked a little bit about grades 7, 8 and 9s, and unless you've got older sons or daughters who have already been through this process and you've become familiar with this, you may still be a little bit more comfortable with old money. So let me just briefly explain the grading structure. So it says new, obviously no longer new, going back to 2017. But broadly speaking, there's a direct correlation between the old grade A and a grade 7. But the top grade, the A star, has now been split between a sort of top and bottom half of the A star, still a fantastic grade to achieve, the 8 and 9. And similarly, the grade B has been split between a higher B and a lower B, the grade 5 or 6. And that information is sort of relevant to when we start to look ahead to sixth form studies. So in most cases, students will have a minimum of a grade 7 to go on to study any of the A-level choices they want to. So that just gives you a little bit of context around how the grading system works if you've heard these numbers mentioned in the press but didn't really know what they meant. So then the final part then is actually choosing your subjects. You've got your core subjects of 7, so choosing those 3 option subjects. So you will have received an online Microsoft form to complete, and you simply need to select the 3 subjects. I've just put a sort of highlight around 4 of the subjects in particular. So the computer science and our 3 DT options. Those subjects in particular are taught in specialist rooms, and even though over the years in growing popularity we've actually created more of those spaces, they are a finite limited space. So there is sometimes a cap on numbers. Fingers crossed we've never actually had to turn down anyone for those courses, but just to be aware that we do have to put an overall cap on those subjects simply because of limited specialist space. But for all subjects, and particularly for those, we do ask you to enter a reserve subject. So obviously if one of your choices is one of the DT options, then please don't choose another DT option. Please just think about an alternative subject. As I said, in almost all cases, we can accommodate every GCSE option, but we do just ask for that reserve just in case. So I think that's everything that I wanted to cover in terms of the process of choosing options. So I'm now going to hand over to Mr. Grant, who's just going to talk about some of the things that have already been happening and also a little bit more guidance on how to actually go about narrowing down those choices and the kind of questions you want to discuss with your children, but also to discuss with teachers at parents' evenings and other events. So over to Mr. Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. You've mentioned already about that the discussions have been ongoing, and the first point on this slide here on the timeline is that throughout this month, discussions have been ongoing with both tutors and subject teachers about what subject choices students might be wanting to make for their GCSE options. And these are really important and valuable discussions that they can continue with. Obviously, the 21st of January today is when this GCSE option presentation is available, and you can refer back to it, but also the booklet is coming home today as well. Next Wednesday, the 26th of January, is the parents' consultation evening and a chance for you to speak directly with your sons and daughters' subject teachers, to ask them some questions about how they're getting on in the subject, maybe looking ahead to GCSE and some of the questions you might have about the content there and their suitability for taking those options. Looking ahead then to the week commencing the 31st of January, these are for the last 2 weeks before half term. During tutor time, tutors will be looking at the Moresby 12+ career guidance, which will provide some steering ideas towards what potential careers, university options might be looking for subject combinations. So this might be of assistance to students who are still weighing up the suitability of some of the choices that they might be thinking about, along with their future thoughts towards where they might want to go with their careers and university choices. As mentioned on Mr. Cooper's slide, the option forms, the online option forms, all need to be returned by the 21st of February, which is the first Monday back after half term. Now, thinking about what factors one should consider when trying to make GCSE option subject choices, I think the first really key thing to consider is, do you actually enjoy the subject? Well over half of the journey to success in any one subject is actually the enjoyment and the engagement that one has with the subject, and so therefore it's a really crucial part of that choice making process. But of course, you also need to consider beyond just the enjoyment, actually one's own strengths in that subject area, and so therefore, is this a subject that I'm realistically going to be doing well with, and therefore succeeding not only at GCSE, perhaps at A-level and beyond. Many of these subjects are facilitating subjects that open up pathways towards different options at A-level, university and careers, and there are discussions to be had about the suitability of certain GCSE options in providing that pathway to A-levels and beyond. The Moresby process, discussions with subject tutors, but of course discussions with Mr. Fitzgerald as well might help students to make those choices. And then perhaps one of the other choices might be about what that course looks like over the 2 years, and trying to manage that balance then between practical work, independent work, so that's the NEA, the non-examined assessment coursework, and exams at the end of the 2 years of study, and trying to make sure that the balance, the way in which these subjects are presented and assessed, works for your son or daughter. Conversely, there are certain things that I think maybe we should try to discard or try to be conscious of when making these decisions. Teenagers and their friends are highly influential on one another, okay? And despite the thoughts that others might have, the subject choices that their friends might be opting for may not be suitable for your son or your daughter, and so therefore they shouldn't be steered by discussions that they're having with them. Equally speaking, over these first 3 years at KGS, your son or daughter might have made a strong connection with the subject teachers that have been teaching them, but you need to start to think about the subject in itself rather than the individual subject teachers. There can be no guarantee about who will be teaching which class over the next couple of years. And then, of course, GCSEs change the specification. Different exam boards are taken by different schools, and again, these might change over time. And so therefore the specifics that people have gone through these GCSE courses in the past, their friends, older siblings, may not be applicable to the choices that are facing our students now. Okay, thinking about the next steps then, and just to reiterate, the options subjects booklet, which is coming home tonight, should provide you with the majority of your information and the detail there. Any further discussions on that, obviously, your sons and daughters can ask their subject tutors, and at next week's parents' evening, you might be able to get answers to some of those questions you have. Encourage your child to talk to everyone, form tutors, subject teachers, and of course to you as well. The more questions, the more discussion that goes on, the better decisions can be reached. And then finally, if you do have specific career or university questions, which maybe subject teachers, form tutors, or us as parents cannot answer, then please do get in touch directly with Mr. Fitzgerald. His email address is on the screen here, and he will be able to provide you with specific answers to questions related to careers and universities. Right, so that ends my part of the presentation here, and I'll pass back over to Mr. Lehek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, and indeed to Mr. Cooper as well, for that presentation, excellent presentation on kind of next steps and what you're choosing, what you're doing. Let's just address then some questions, if we may. We've already been mentioned a couple of times, and a lot of parents will be thinking, as will students, so where do I go with this specific question? There's lots of information out there, and I think one of the problems most of our students will face is the narrowing down, even though, as Mr. Cooper said, you've already been through stage 1 of that process, going from year 2 to 3. But actually, pretty much most students will be able to take all the subjects to studying and more. So how do they narrow down? Who do they speak to? Well, if it's subject related, such as what am I going to be studying at GCSE, and I've read the booklet, but could you please unpack that a little bit more? That's a subject teacher question, maybe even a head of department question. If it's more around the balance for the individual, that might be more directed towards Mr. Grant. If it's more technical and specific around the GCSE choices and options process, that might go directly to Mr. Cooper. And as Mr. Grant just pointed out, if it's more around what does the future hold for me if I take this balance of subjects and I'm thinking of this path for university or careers, or I'm not sure what path, then maybe Mr. Fitzgerald is the person to direct the question to. And of course, to chat to friends is fine, but not to follow their choices. To chat to brothers and sisters, as Mr. Grant said, is fine, but not to follow their choices. And indeed, to chat to parents, look, is fine, but not necessarily to follow their choices too. Dare I say it, that for the students, this has to be their GCSEs, the subjects they feel passionate about, that they want to follow. What a lot of parents will say to us often is, well, where is the structure, the form, the columns, the blocks, if you like? Shouldn't I be picking one from here and one from here and one from here? Options don't work like that anymore, and in fact they don't work like that. I don't think they ever really have at KGS. We like to have a free range of choices for students to select, because they are limited 23 choices really, to select the subjects they want. And whilst we don't 100% guarantee, because something could go wrong year in terms of combination of subjects, I don't think we failed in my time at the school to fulfill everybody's options choices, because we create the blocks once everybody's put in their options. Essentially, we will fit the structure of how the GCSE timetable and blocking system works around what people want to study. It seems a far more sensible way of actually looking at what the students want to do rather than shoehorning them into areas. They've got that great balance, they've got that great core of subjects, so it's really important to look at what they want to study. But there are other questions which are slightly more technical, such as why some subjects study the GCSE curriculum and others are IGCSE, and this is a question that, because lots of people ask it, I think Mr. Cooper will probably address for us now, and just unpack exactly why some subjects follow different curriculums and different, whether it's GCSE or IGCSE. So can I hand back to you, Mr. Cooper, just to address that specific question?
Absolutely, and as you said, it is a sort of slightly technical question and has quite a technical answer. So roughly about half of our subjects are GCSE and the other half are IGCSE or international GCSE. And the sort of technical aspect is that it's actually really to do with how those the IGCSEs are not regulated by the government in England. And the net result of that is that those in the state-maintained sector aren't then allowed to do IGCSEs anymore. They don't appear in league tables. But in terms of actually, well, what's the difference between those courses? Because there's no difference in status, certainly in terms of universities and employers. But there are subtle differences even between GCSEs, between the different exam boards, and again, subtle differences between IGCSEs and GCSEs. But really the principle that we work on is that every single department is able to choose what they think is the most suitable course for their students, and really that's based on two key things. Firstly, what is going to be the best preparation if they want to then go on and study those subjects at A level, and are they going to find them engaging and challenging them through the GCSE years? But the second question is, and are they also going to get the kind of grades and results that actually justify their hard work? So on that note, what we certainly don't do is we don't shop around to try and find what are perceived to be easier GCSEs. Depending on who you ask, some people will say GCSEs are harder than IGCSEs, other people will say the opposite. Actually, we're not interested in that discussion. The grades are available, the top grades are available to all of those students, and they're roughly comparable. What's more important to us is actually what's the course content and how is it assessed, and there are subtle differences between GCSEs and IGCSEs, but otherwise it really is just that technicality that IGCSEs are simply unregulated by the government in England, and so have a slightly different status in their eyes, but certainly not in terms of the education sector. But it is a question, as you say, Mr. Leck, that comes up every year, and it is just worth clarifying.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, and indeed thank you for all of the presentation, whatever time of day people are watching, and same to Mr. Grant. And also I ought to say thanks to Mrs. Creasy in the background, our technical support and advisor who's making this all happen seamlessly. Before I say thank you for watching and off you go to Parents' Evening or the Orange Booklet or a bit of both to make those all important decisions, I'm just going to touch on one more question that comes up occasionally, which is the absence of some GCSE subjects from the options. Every year we get asked about one or more of these subjects: business studies, media studies, PE, sociology, whatever it happens to be. The answer to that question is actually quite simple, that on a regular basis, every 2 to 3 years, we do perform a curriculum review. And not only do we ask students and parents what they think of our offering and how the school is structured, but we also look at staff, gain their expertise, speak to other schools, particularly within our local London group of independent schools. A more tight-knit group would be the Trinity group of top independent schools in our area, but also we speak to universities about their opinions on certain subjects and what they're looking for. And so what happens is we create this funnel of, you've got a broad range of subjects you study at Key Stage 3. You then make some choices at GCSE that we think are the most facilitating subjects with that core and the options added onto it to open up the rich range of opportunities at A level, where it opens up again in terms of the number of subjects that are available. But obviously you're then limiting yourself down to 3 or 4 A levels plus some co-curricular study on top of that, and some super curricular study too. And what that all amounts to is then when you get to that all important decision around the university choices or career choices, be it apprenticeships or a combination of subject areas, wherever you're applying, you have the facility to do so, the ability to do so, because of the subject you studied, and you haven't disappeared down any rabbit hole or done any subject that a university or an employer wouldn't recognise as being as facilitating or important as another. So it's really important to us to maintain that, because we think that studying media, studying business, studying PE, studying sociology, lots of subjects, politics, law, have huge and deep importance, but not necessarily as formal courses of study for GCSE. And in fact, students can study those in other ways, in other means, either formally or informally, without actually digressing from the core of subjects they're going to need for A-level study or for university study. And obviously, if anybody has any particular views on any of those subjects, we'd be happy to discuss those in detail. Specifically, if you email me or Mr. Cooper or Mr. Grant or a subject teacher directly, we'd be happy to take on those questions. But rest assured, we do revisit and review on an ongoing basis to make sure that what KGS students are being offered is absolutely what they need to be able to take the next steps towards A-level, towards university, towards careers, and towards success, which is hugely important, success in all its forms. So thank you again to everybody involved, Mrs. Creasy, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Grant. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Good luck with making those all important choices. We know it's going to be difficult, and when the time comes, good luck with achieving everything that you deserve during the course of your GCSEs.